Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. I've been in this line of work for over 30 years. In this job, you quickly learn to read silence, that stillness that settles in a chapel when the only ones present are the dead. You learn to respect it, sometimes even to fear it, but never to ignore it. There's a particular kind of silence that covers a funeral home after midnight. It isn't just the absence of sound, it's a weight, a presence, as if the entire building were holding its breath. We don't talk about it much among the staff, not out of superstition, but out of respect. We handle death carefully, and we know better than to disturb things that don't ask for our attention. Still, some things demand to be noticed. It all started about 6 months ago. The night shift staff began reporting strange occurrences during their rounds. Doors that had been closed were found open, lights in the viewing rooms flickering on one by one. Never all at once, just enough to make you stop and look. And then came the video. We have security cameras, of course. That's standard, not just for safety, but for accountability. You'd be surprised what people do when they think no one's watching. But this was different. One of the night employees, Eric, was the first to notice it. Quiet man, ex-military, reliable, not the type to scare easily. One morning he came to me pale as a sheet and asked me to review a recording myself. I did. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. The chapel was dimly lit, as always, a soft light over the coffin, a sign of respect for the recently departed. In the center of the room stood a figure, dark, thin, motionless. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel calm. It feels like it's watching you. At first I thought it was Eric himself, maybe making his rounds. But then I saw the face, or rather the direction it was facing. It was looking directly at the camera, not at the coffin, not at the hallway, not like someone caught mid-step, just standing there, watching. I replayed the footage, slower. The camera is mounted high at the back of the chapel, angled downward. To look directly into the lens, the head would have to be tilted upward, far too high, unnaturally so. We checked the logs. No one had entered the chapel at that hour. No doors opened, no alarms triggered, nothing. For a while, we blamed a technical glitch, a shadow, a reflection, until it kept happening. Always around the same time, between 2 and 2:30 a.m. Always the same figure. Sometimes further back, sometimes closer to the coffin. Once even right at the front, hands at its sides like a mourner or a sentinel, but always staring at the camera. We tried to explain it. Called in a technician to inspect the system. He watched the recordings, checked the motion sensors, and finally said, "Looks like someone's been walking through your chapel." When I asked how someone could enter without triggering the alarms or appearing on the entry cameras, he just shrugged. Could be a blind spot in the system. But it wasn't. I know every inch of that building. There are no blind spots. There never have been. Soon we began noticing other things. Personal items in the chapel moved. Condolence cards, photographs, little keepsakes. Nothing was stolen, just shifted slightly, as if someone had been studying them. One night I decided to stay. Just me, the chapel, and the silence. I didn't go inside. I sat in the adjoining room, monitor on, camera streaming live. Nothing for the first hour, nothing for the second. And then, it appeared. The figure slid into frame from the left corner, just beyond the coffin's faint glow. It didn't move like a person. No sway, no hesitation. It was simply there. One moment it wasn't. The next it was. And true to its habit, it turned its head. Not slowly, not dramatically, but with a sharp, unnatural motion, and stared straight into the lens. I wanted to go in, to prove it was someone, anyone. But I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't respond. My mouth was dry. My body refused to obey. I just sat there, frozen, watching as the figure stood motionless for 6 full minutes, and then vanished. I've never seen it enter. I've never seen it leave. It just appears when the night is deepest and the weight of grief hangs heaviest. We don't talk much about it anymore. We still use the cameras, but we avoid checking the chapel footage unless absolutely necessary. Some of the staff have started leaving little offerings by the door. Flowers, candles, old rosaries. Once I saw someone leave a folded note on a bench. The coffins remain untouched. The dead rest in peace. But someone, or something, still comes to watch over them. Not every night, but often enough to remind us that not everyone who mourns is alive. And in this line of work, you learn something important. Silence isn't always empty. Sometimes, it's an answer. Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me for this story. A special shout out to our subscribers. You're the reason these unsettling tales stay alive. Only 30% of those who watch our videos are subscribed. If you enjoy our content, subscribing helps more than you can imagine. It only takes a second, but it makes a huge difference. And if you want to keep the chills coming, don't forget to leave a like and share. Thanks again for making it possible. See you in the next story, if you dare. Story 2. I've organized hundreds of funerals over the years. Most people think my job is about death, but it's really about the living. It's about listening, guiding, and doing everything possible to help families say goodbye. Most days are routine, or as routine as death can be. But every so often a family comes along, and something feels different. Not strange, not supernatural, just out of place. That was the case with the Harpers. Michael Harper was 22 years old. He drowned while fishing at the family's lake cabin. According to the report, he was alone when it happened. His mother found the overturned boat still tethered to the dock by the anchor rope. They recovered his body 2 days later. The call came in on a Thursday night. When I saw the state of the body, I immediately understood why we would recommend a closed casket. Water does terrible things to the human body, especially after 2 nights in the cold. Then Mrs. Harper arrived to make the arrangements. She came in wearing a plain gray coat, hands clasped together, her expression unreadable. She sat down, stared straight ahead, and before I could even offer my condolences, she spoke. "The casket stays closed," she said. "Don't open it. Don't even ask." I assured her that wouldn't be a problem. We always respect the family's wishes. But then she added something else, something that made me stop. "He's not really in there." I waited. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. Her voice wasn't weak. It was calm, steady, almost as if she were stating a simple fact. She told me that ever since the night her son drowned, he'd been coming home. Not in dreams, not in visions, physically. Every night around 3 a.m., she said, he comes through the back door. He's soaked, dripping wet, just like the day they pulled him from the lake. At first, I thought she was speaking metaphorically. Grief does strange things. People say what they must to cope, but she kept going. She described finding puddles, hearing footsteps, the creak of the stairs. She said she would get up to check, thinking she must be losing her mind, but then she'd see him. Standing in the hallway, in the half-light, clothes clinging to his body, head slightly tilted, watching her, silent. "I try to clean up the water," she told me, "but by morning there's nothing there." She didn't speak with emotion. She wasn't trying to convince me. She was just describing events, like someone describing the weather. When she handed me the photo for the obituary, Michael smiling, barefoot on the boat, fishing rod in hand, I noticed her hands didn't shake. Not at all. We proceeded with the arrangements. She didn't request flowers. She didn't want a long service, just enough for the family to gather. Closed casket, of course, not only because of the state of the body, but because, according to her, it was empty. Only a few people attended. She sat at the back, never once lifted her gaze, never looked toward the casket. Her eyes stayed fixed on the doors, as if waiting for someone. When the service ended and the guests began to leave quietly, she approached me. "I had to do it," she said, "for the others, so they'll believe he's gone." Then she looked up. Her expression was still blank, but her voice dropped lower. "But I still see him. I still hear the water hitting the floor." We buried the casket 2 days later. She didn't stay. She watched from her car, engine running, and left before the final shovelful of dirt fell. I didn't expect to hear from her again. But a few months later, a colleague from another town told me something. A woman had come in to make her own funeral arrangements. She wanted her casket not only locked, but sealed with reinforced bolts. When they asked her why, she answered, voice steady, emotionless, "Because when I die, I don't want to come back dripping wet." Story 3. I've been in the funeral business for over 27 years. I've seen it all. Grief in its rawest form, families broken by loss, people who pass quietly in their sleep, and others whose lives end suddenly and violently. I've buried the very old and the terribly young, but nothing, not even the hardest nights, prepared me for what happened with Mr. Lawson's body. Gregory Lawson, age 53, divorced, construction worker, the kind of man who looked like he'd lived through more hard days than most could survive. Weathered skin, broad shoulders, strong hands. He died during what the police report described as a violent altercation. No further details were given, but when we prepared the body, the marks told their own story. Deep bruises, torn tissue, clear evidence that his death had not been peaceful. He was delivered to the funeral home just before midnight on a Tuesday. That alone was strange. Transport companies prefer to make deliveries during the day, unless the family insists, which wasn't the case here. Lawson had only one relative, his daughter Erin. She came by once, briefly signed the paperwork, requested a closed casket service, and left without staying a minute longer than she had to. When we finished the embalming, my assistant Sam and I placed the body in one of our older but well-kept coffins. Dark oak, bronze hardware, a firm 3-pin latch. Nothing unusual. We closed the lid and moved it into the chapel, which also serves as our preparation area for next day services. The next morning I arrived early, as I always do, before sunrise. The coffin was open, not completely, just a small clean gap, as if someone had carefully unlatched it and lifted the lid slightly. Not forced, not damaged, just open. I thought maybe Sam had forgotten to secure it after the final adjustments. It happens, though rarely. I closed it myself, heard the pins click into place, gave it a firm push. Solid. Sealed. That night I went home early. Sam stayed behind to clean up. Later, he swore he had checked the coffin before leaving. It was closed, secured. But Thursday morning when I arrived, the lid was open again. Exactly the same. No tool marks, no scratches, no signs of pressure or tampering. We checked everything. The locking mechanism worked perfectly. The wood wasn't swollen. The seal was intact. We closed it again, and this time I slipped a small wooden wedge under the lid. An old trick we use when a latch doesn't align properly. Friday, third morning. The same thing, but this time the wedge had been removed and placed neatly on the floor beside the coffin. On the lid was a faint handprint pressed into the varnish, as if something, or someone, had pushed from the inside. I called Sam and asked if he'd returned during the night. He said no. I believed him. 10 years working together. Steady hands, clear mind, no reason to lie. We said nothing to Erin. She had a private viewing scheduled that evening before the burial, and there was no need to worry her. Still, something in me wouldn't rest. I decided to stay. I turned off the lights, leaving only the dim glow that's customary at night. Sat in the last pew. No music, no distractions. Just the creaking of the old building as darkness settled in. Time passed slowly. My coffee went cold. Around midnight, sleep began to pull at me. And then I heard it. Tap, tap. I froze. It wasn't the wood settling. It wasn't a mouse in the wall. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like fingers tapping. I stood up slowly, took a few steps toward the coffin. Tap, tap, tap. Now there was no mistaking it. It came from inside, from beneath the lid. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining it. Exhaustion, stress. But deep down I knew. My pulse was steady. My mind was clear. This wasn't fear. It was certainty. I placed my palm on the lid. It was cold. Colder than the air. Cold in a way that didn't belong to this world. And then, silence. I didn't open it. Let me make that clear. I'm a funeral director, not a fool. Whatever it was or wasn't, I didn't need to see it. I left the chapel, locked the door, and slept in my office with the lights on and the door shut tight. The next morning, I called an outside technician to inspect the coffin. He found nothing wrong. Said it was one of the best sealed coffins he'd ever seen. No reason at all for it to keep opening. He even joked, "Maybe the deceased is trying to send you a message." I didn't laugh. We buried Mr. Lawson that afternoon. Erin was there, standing still, silent through the entire service. She left without a word, without looking back, and never visited the grave again. But there's something I've never told anyone. Until now. A week after the burial, I found an unmarked envelope in the funeral home's mailbox. No return address, no message, just a photograph. It showed Mr. Lawson in black and white in profile, hands cuffed, knuckles bloodied. He looked like he was in a police station or a hospital. And in the background, almost out of focus, was a young woman, face bruised, eyes hollow. Erin. There were no words on the back, no explanation. I still keep that photo locked in my desk drawer. There was nothing supernatural about what happened, but something wasn't right. That man did not die in peace, and he didn't rest in peace either. Some people take their sins to the grave, and others carry them even farther. Story 4. In my line of work, peace is what we always try to offer. To families, to the atmosphere, and yes, to the dead. We aim for calm transitions, clean farewells, and orderly silences. But every now and then, a case comes along that doesn't stay quiet. One that lingers. One that refuses to rest. Her name was Margaret Elsie, 81 years old. Widow. No children. She lived alone in a modest house on the outskirts of town. The neighbors said she was reserved, kind, soft-spoken. The sort of person who watered her plants at the same time every day and never missed her evening walk. Margaret died in her sleep. Heart failure, nothing dramatic. A peaceful passing according to the coroner. She simply drifted away at dawn. I remember when they brought her in. Her expression was serene, as though she'd been dreaming something pleasant. Her hands were still warm when we placed her on the table. That detail stayed with me. We scheduled her preparation for the following afternoon. Nothing elaborate, a basic embalming, closed casket per her will. Still, I like to make sure everything is perfect. We closed her eyes, sealed her mouth, aligned her features to preserve a look of peace, just in case any relative wanted one last farewell. That night, we left her in a temperature-controlled room. No handling, no interruptions. We keep a small infrared camera in the prep area, not out of superstition, but for legal reasons. Sometimes families request footage to confirm procedures or account for missing jewelry. The next morning, Jude arrived first. I was working on another case when he called, not 5 minutes later. I answered on the first ring. "Boss," he said, "you need to come see her face." I didn't understand until I got there. Margaret's mouth had changed. The lips we had gently closed were now open. Not slightly, but grotesquely. Stretched back unnaturally, exposing her teeth, the corners drawn almost to her ears in a terrible grin. It wasn't the typical post-mortem contraction of rigor mortis. No, this had intent, as if something had forced its way out from within. We checked everything. No tissue displacement, no ruptures, No internal pressure, no gas buildup. Nothing that could justify such distortion. We had to act fast. The service was less than 24 hours away, and though the casket was meant to stay closed, we couldn't risk a relative asking to see her. I used mortuary wax on her cheeks. Jude reinforced the jaw with a needle injector. We even sutured the gums, something we rarely do. In the end, she looked composed, barely. There was still a tension under the makeup, as if her face didn't want to stay that way. We would have left it at that, an odd post-mortem anomaly, nothing more, if not for the recording. That night after closing, I reviewed the camera footage. Black and white, low resolution, 12 frames per second. Just enough to catch any irregularities. At 2:14 a.m., Margaret lay still, as expected. At 2:16, the image flickered briefly, a power fluctuation, I assumed. At 2:18, her face began to move, not suddenly, slowly, frame by frame. Her lips began to curl as though a thread were being pulled through the fabric of her skin. Her cheeks lifted. Her teeth appeared. It wasn't a spasm. It wasn't a reflex. She was smiling, and she wasn't facing upward. She was smiling to the left, toward the wall, toward the corner of the room, just beyond the edge of the camera's view. She held that smile for 3 full minutes. Then stillness returned. By morning, her mouth had frozen that way. I've never shown that video to anyone. It's still stored on the security drive, date and timestamp intact. I've only watched it twice since that night, once with Jude, once alone. When we buried Margaret, the coffin was sealed tight, silicone shut just in case. And though no one else will say it, I know the truth. Some smiles aren't born from peace. Some smiles belong to what does not rest. Story 5. We keep our dead in the cold, not out of fear, out of necessity. The refrigeration chamber at the back of the funeral home is a standard part of any facility like ours. Stainless steel walls, locking shelves, freezing air flowing 24 hours a day. It can hold up to 12 bodies at once. I've spent more time in that room than I care to admit, checking toe tags, logging arrivals, making sure everything is in order. Over time, you grow numb, immune. The silence becomes routine, stillness expected. But in this profession, there's one kind of silence you never forget. The wrong kind, the kind that feels aware. It began 2 years ago, subtly, almost imperceptibly. One of the staff mentioned hearing a voice inside the cooler, low rhythmic murmuring words. He thought someone was praying. We went to check. No one there. Weeks later, someone else heard something. Not prayers this time, but muffled crying. They thought it was coming from the air ducts. We had the system inspected. Nothing unusual, but the sounds continued. Whispers, fragmented phrases that stopped the moment you got too close. One morning, our embalmer, a man who'd worked here nearly 7 years, walked into my office visibly shaken. He said he'd been organizing the shelves, placing a newly arrived body in slot number 10. The others were silent, and then from the back of the chamber he heard his own name, clear, distinct. A man's voice. He froze, waited. Then it came again, his name repeated, calm and direct. He checked every tag. No bodies with his last name, no coincidences. The third time the voice was louder, closer. He left the room and never went back in. That was his last day of work. I wish I could say it ended there, that it was the imagination of an exhausted man. But it didn't. Over time, more employees began hearing things, voices calling their names, words in unknown languages, labored breathing, sobs that sounded far too human. Always and always coming from the back of the refrigerator. We checked the insulation, thought maybe it was the building settling or interference in the ventilation. We even replaced the security camera, hoping to find mice or a wiring issue. What we captured was worse. The video looked normal, body still, tagged, motionless. But the audio. Around 3 a.m., a whisper began, One word, sometimes a name, the name of someone on staff that week. Other times short phrases and stay, listen, and sometimes a melody, wordless, tuneless, hummed for minutes at a time. We keep those recordings locked away. They're not for the public, not for families. Since then, I quietly changed the rules. No one enters alone. Always work in pairs, and never after midnight. Even so, sometimes I still hear it. When I close up at night, when the compressor kicks in and the lights hum low, the air seems to speak. A murmur, not quite a voice, not quite a thought. A whisper that reminds me, even in the cold, something stays awake. Thank you for joining me in these stories. Your support means everything, and I love reading your reactions and experiences in the comments. If these tales made you shiver or kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Have you ever experienced something similar? Or do you have your own unexplainable story to tell? I'd love to read it below. Every one of your stories adds another layer to this growing community of horror lovers. And if you know someone who enjoys a good scare, share it. Remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could happen to any of us. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story if you dare.